let's talk dark academia. Hi, I'm Colleen. I talk about books and writing. This video is going to be my personal take on some dark academia favorites. I had found a list on Goodreads like 2 months ago that I worked off of with the top 50 dark academias, and that specific list I worked off is gone, but I'm still going to use it because I like the books that were on it. And I had read 13 of the 50 that they had, and I think I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to do it in the order in which, like from first to last, that they had them ranked. I'm going to tell you whether or not I think these books are dark academia. I'm going to tell you when I read them and what I thought of them. There was one book on the list, and I'm just bringing this up because this is a recent publication that's very popular, that I'm not going to rank or review or anything, and that's Babel by R.F. Kuang, and that is because I only read the first 150 pages of it. I DNF'd it. I think that was in early 2023, but I'm having a hard time remembering exactly when it was, probably because I didn't get that far. And it was just one of those where like the writing style wasn't for me, so I don't feel like I'm able to actually give any sort of review of that book. So let's start, of course, with the book that always has first place on every dark academia list you read. And that is, of course, The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I have a hard time believing that anyone who has stumbled across this video has never heard of this book, but in case you haven't, it takes place in the 1980s at a small liberal arts school in New England, or I think we're in New England. And it's about a group of friends who are in this sort of like elite language program, and there's some murders, okay? That's the best way I can describe without giving away too much of the plot. This is considered sort of like the Dark Academia Bible. It came out, I want to say in the 90s, but is about the 80s. Now I'm going to double check the publication day. 92. And when you read it though, I would say it definitely feels not of the late 80s, early 90s. You definitely are reading this kind of out of time. It has that specific old money, super smart feel that kind of any book or movie that has that dark academia vibe has. Now, I never finished this book. I'm on page 275 out of 5 something. And I was thinking about this morning as to why I never finished this book. I read the majority of it, I think it was last winter, but it might have honestly been winter 2024. I was thinking about why I think it was winter 2024 actually, why I never picked it back up. And honestly, it's a personal preference because I do find her writing style very beautiful, though dense. It's not a quick read. It will take you a long time to read this book. Maybe not, maybe you're someone who can read this quickly, but I think if you're actually going to appreciate the sentence structure and language, it will take you a long time. I really don't like long chapters, and several of her chapters are 100 pages long. And so I do think, I was thinking about that if this book had 20-page chapters or even 40-page chapters, I think I would have already finished it. Now, I haven't officially DNF'd this. I tend to sell books I officially DNF. I am just waiting for a time in which I feel like reading the next chapter. Let's see how long chapter 6 is. Actually, I think chapter 6 is the one that's not that long. So let's see. Maybe I will read it. So I lied. Chapter 6 is 101 pages long. So that is just something that for me personally is hard to get motivated to pick up. I think partially because when I sit down to read, I don't often have hours or even an hour to read straight. I read and then put it down, read and put it down. And I don't love putting a book down in the middle of its chapters. But if you are a dark academia king or queen, I'm sure you've read this and hopefully enjoyed it. Now, book 2 is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I really enjoyed this book a lot. So the best way I can pitch this, and I did pitch it as such to one of my good friends, is if you want to read a dark academia book and you love Shakespeare, you're going to love this book because it's so deeply ingrained in Shakespeare. The premise is that you have this group of friends. It's very similar to The Secret History in that you have this group of very cerebral friends. In this book, they are in this very intensive theater program in which they are constantly performing Shakespeare. So when you just think about the pure memorization these kids have to do, they're doing, I want to say like 6 Shakespeare productions a year, memorizing all these lines, etc. And within this group of friends, one friend is murdered. Now the book begins years after a friend in that group is released from prison after going to jail for the murder of this friend. And the detective, who is retired, said, will you finally tell me the real story? And so he proceeds to. I really enjoyed this book a lot. If you liked The Secret History, I would say this is a more accessible version of it. It's still really beautifully written, but you don't have sort of the insanely long chapters that are more difficult to get through. You get some real quick, I mean, these chapters are like 6 pages long. So there's a little bit more of a, you don't have to sit down and devote 2 hours of reading whenever you want to pick up the book. And on this non-existent list, the book ranked 3rd was Ninth House by Leah Bardugo, which I did just read this summer. This is about Alex, who in the short can see ghosts, and she is recruited to go to Yale to take part in this secret society that kind of handles supernatural stuff. That's like the simplest explanation of it. Alex has a very odd upbringing for going to Yale. She dropped out of high school. She isn't particularly smart. She just has this supernatural bend that gets her a place there. This book jumps in time a lot. You're going to time in the past in which she's working with her friend Darrington, and then time in the present in which Darrington is gone. He has been sort of like taken out of this dimension. I'm just going to give this as a spoiler because I think that it's important to know before you pick this book up. There was a sexual assault scene in this book that was very difficult for me to get over, and therefore more difficult for me to enjoy the book. I do think if you want your dark academia to have a heavy fantasy, almost sci-fi bend, because there's a lot of like science feeling stuff in it, that you would probably enjoy Ninth House. But going in, no, there is a rough sexual assault scene of a young girl who I think is 12. And that was difficult. And you're in first person for it. Those 3 books I do feel like fit the bill for dark academia. They took place at universities. Dark stuff happens. There's dead bodies. There's murder. There's obviously Ninth House had sexual assault. So it's very dark themes taking place at a university. In the list I went off of, but also I looked in a lot of Goodreads dark academia lists have this book. The next one is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, I read that book in the year 2000 in January or February in my Brit Lit class. I just remember it being really cold, so January, February sounds about right. As a 16-year-old, I didn't love this book, but I also didn't dislike it. I actually really enjoyed almost every book I read in that Brit Lit class. I had a wonderful Jesuit priest as the teacher. I thought of it really as an interesting reflection on morality, and it was like a cool story, like the idea of the painting in the attic. And it was also fun for me because my dad used to always reference Picture of Dorian Gray before I had read it, because my dad looked extremely young for his age. Like, can't tell you how many times it got mistaken for his girlfriend once I was in my 20s, but he just had like a very, very young looking appearance, and didn't go gray till he was like 55. Fingers crossed that happens for me. And he used to say, when people would be like, you're 45, you look 30. And he'd say, the picture in the attic's looking awful, which, so I loved getting to read the book because of that. I would not classify this as a dark academia novel, but I understand why people do. I think because this would be a good book to read in a dark academia novel. Let me explain. If you're writing a dark academia novel that takes place in, honestly, for Picture of Dorian Gray, it would most likely be more of a boarding school than a university. I do think that it's a good novel for your characters to be studying if you're looking at themes of morality. I think that would be a great novel to study. It's got the sort of murky feel of what's right and what's wrong. It definitely has more like a gothic themes that would lend itself really well to be studying in a dark academia novel. I wouldn't really classify it, though, as being a dark academia novel. Okay. Next is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. This is my first Alex Michaelides, and I really enjoyed this book. It is dark academia with a heavy dose of thriller. So I would say it's more of a thriller with a dark academia setting than a dark academia with a thriller plotline, if that makes sense. It's very fast paced. You're going to read it quickly, but it does take place at Oxford, and there is a murder, and then there are some cult-like activities, but it doesn't sort of have that same sense of, what's the right word? I want to say like meandering. Like The Secret History meanders a bit. If We Were Villains meanders a bit. they kind of take their time, whereas The Maidens is a thriller first. So it is really going to be moving quickly, but I liked it a lot. Next up, we have Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. I read this book in, I think, 2022. If you're looking for a dark academia book and you're not into like dead languages and history, but you are like a science person, this would be the dark academia book for you. We follow Inez, and she has gotten into this sort of bizarre university program. So you're college age, but you're going to this school that feels more like a boarding school because it's so compact. You're in this building called Catherine House. There's not that many people, and there's not like a campus really that you're exploring, and there's no town you can go to. When you commit, you're going to stay there for 3 years and you're not going to leave. So it's kind of weird. It doesn't feel like a normal university in which, you know, when you're reading The Secret History, If We Were Villains has a very like feeling that you can't leave because you're so isolated in Illinois. But when you read The Secret History, there's towns nearby. There's references of cab drivers and stuff like that. So it doesn't feel as trapped. Catherine House, you feel very trapped. But it's the whole thing that if you go there, you're going to leave and either be like a Supreme Court justice or a Pulitzer Prize winning author or a Nobel Peace Prize winning scientist or something like that, or a president and an inventor. And then you kind of just watch this descent into sort of grotesque madness. I didn't super connect with this book, but I thought that the setting was so unique and really inventive for the dark academia subgenre. I felt like Elizabeth Thomas really took dark academia and made it her own. So for that reason alone, I think it's a great one to check out. The world building in this is phenomenal. Next up, we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which is getting so much press right now because of the new movie, which I haven't watched yet, but I do think I will watch. This is another book I read in the year 2000. Very close to when I read Picture of Dorian Gray, and another book that's going to be on this list. My Brit Lit class did a really good job getting me some reads on this list. The question is, did I like Frankenstein when I read it? And the answer is not really. I thought it was sort of fine, but I really respect Mary Shelley for inventing the genre of science fiction, which is insane. And I find the story of that summer that she spent with Byron and her husband and a couple other people really fascinating. We watched the movie Haunted Summer in my Brit Lit class after we read this book, and I found that to be a little bit more interesting than Frankenstein. But I do think obviously the invention of science fiction, very important for our world and culture, but also the fact that a young woman was able to write this book at that time is very cool. And I really love Mary Shelley's mom, Mary Wollstonecraft, because I did minor in philosophy. Again, though, I don't really feel like this is a dark academia book, but I feel like this is probably a book that inspired a book like Catherine House, if that makes sense. So if you're going to write a dark academia with a science bent, I do think Frankenstein is a great sort of text to bring in as a text students are studying, or as a sort of question of morality that maybe you're following up in a more school-like setting rather than like a laboratory setting. Now let's move to a book that I didn't read in the year 2000 and talk about The Cloisters, which I read, I think, in 2023. This book is about, 2022, I lied. This book is about a woman named Anne who is from the Pacific Northwest, and she gets a internship at the Met, and she's kind of thrown all her cards down. What is the saying? She's put all her eggs in this basket. She is rented an apartment in New York. She doesn't really have money. She never wants to go back to the Pacific Northwest. Her father has recently died in a hit and run. And when she gets there, the person in charge, who's in charge of her scholarship or her internship, who's supposed to mentor her, is gone. He went to Germany and he's not going to be there, and she doesn't have an internship anymore, and she's panicking. And this man comes in and he's like, well, I could actually use her at the Cloisters, which is another museum in New York of medieval art. And so Anne ends up going there. That man, whose name I'm of course forgetting because it's been 3 years since I read it, his name is Patrick, is trying to find the oldest tarot cards in existence. And Anne gets sort of embroiled in this search, but also a lot of weird things happening at this museum. I loved this book. So, cool things about it. One, it takes place during summer. Most dark academia books, it's like fall, winter. Occasionally you get like a little bit of March. You don't usually get like a hot, sticky, sweaty summer dark academia, but you get it in this one. Two, it's got tarot cards, so you know I'm going to love it because I love tarot cards. Three, I can't believe I didn't go to the cloisters when I was in New York, but obviously the last time I was in New York was like 2005. If you want to read a dark academia about people that are a little bit older, because I think she is like 23 at this point, and you like a museum setting rather than a school setting with heavy research, heavy art, heavy weird interpersonal relationships at a place of work, you're going to like this one a lot. Okay, the next one that was on this list, and it was on a lot of lists, I don't think is a dark academia, but I love this book so much. And it's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I'm very surprised this gets put on dark academia list because there's not really anything academic about it. You follow Addie LaRue, who in the 1700s or 1600s, 1700s, makes a deal with a demon so she doesn't have to marry someone she doesn't want to marry, and it's a horrible deal. It's basically that she'll live forever, but no one will ever remember her. And the first chunk of this book is real depressing because she still feels hungry and she still feels pain and her life is terrible. It takes her a while to figure out how to live in a world where no one remembers her. And then the second half of this book is heartbreaking because she finally meets someone who does remember her. And I really enjoyed this book, but I don't really see this being dark academia at all. Other than maybe it makes everyone feel sad and depressed. Because it does that. We're jumping back to the 2000s with Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I read this. I wrote it down because I figured it out. In the year 2000, 2002, and 2004. My English lit teachers really enjoyed this book. And then I also read it in high school. So I had one read in high school and then two reads in college. And honestly, I really loved this book until the third reading of it. And then I was just so bored with it because it's hard to read the same book 3 times within 4 years. That's a lot, especially when you're reading in an academic setting. So you're like really going into everything. I am going to let this one be in dark academia though. So unlike Frankenstein and Picture of Dorian Gray, Jane Eyre begins in a boarding school. Jane Eyre's in a horrible boarding school, and then she does work as a governess. So I think there is a portion of this book that you can tie to education and academics. It's not heavy because obviously what everyone remembers about this book is Jane Eyre falling in love with an absolutely awful man when there's something in the attic. But I do think you could sort of give it the dark academia. It's definitely more of a Gothic novel. And I do remember thinking the first time I read this, did Charlotte Bronte invent like the crazy twist? Because I don't know if I've read a book that was published before this that had a twist like that. That was a pretty bananas twist, which I'm not saying because I don't want to spoil it, but I can't imagine you all don't know. But yeah, we're going to give it dark academia status. And I'm going to say I really liked this book a lot. This was a great Brit-lit book. Now, next, we're going to do Dracula by Bram Stoker, which I also read in the year 2000. And I'm going to say this one isn't dark academia. This is a book to be studied in dark academia, but it's like a good read. Like I enjoyed it. And vampires are always like a hot topic. And like right now, obviously, the vampire thing is between Nosferatu last year and then there's that Dracula movie that my entire algorithm is taken over by, which I do like the idea of, and I will see once it comes to the US. But again, I don't really feel like Dracula has dark, I mean, it's again, it'd be a good one to have a juxtaposition of like, I could see a book written with a student who gets obsessed with Dracula, reading it and kind of loses their mind because they're obsessed with Dracula. That would feel more dark academic. Dark academic. And we've come to the last book that was in the top 50 of that list that no longer exists. And it is The Lake of Dead Languages by Carol Goodman. And I'm so happy this book made this list. First of all, I have the English cover because I bought this when I was living in London. I had read her first book. I had read her second book first, right before I went to live in England, and then I bought this there because I loved it so much. The second book is called The Seduction of Water. I would say that if you like dark academia, Carol Goodman would be a wonderful author for you. Now, she writes her dark academia books with a heavy mystery feel, not thriller. Her books aren't like fast-paced thrillers. They're definitely mysteries. This one in particular takes place at a boarding school, and we have two timelines with the same narrator. One timeline is when she's a student there, and one timeline is present day, where she now teaches there. The earlier timeline when she is a student is interesting because her roommates, so she's in a triple, die in a double suicide. And it always kind of didn't sit well with her. And now she is a teacher at this boarding school after having kind of a rough go of life, as one would imagine. And things start to eerily repeat themselves, which had happened when she was a student, and she's getting anxious about what might be following. This is one of the best openings I've ever read in a book, so I'm going to read it to you so you can listen and maybe read this book. The lake in my dreams is always frozen. It is never the lake in summer, its water stained black by the shadows of pine trees. Or the lake in fall, its surface stitched into a quilt of red and gold. Or the lake on a spring night beaded with moonlight. The lake in my dreams reflects nothing. It is the dead white of a closed door, sealed by ice that reaches 60 feet down to the lake's glacial limestone cradle. Beautiful. 100% of dark academia. You should read it. Now, just as a reflection of this video at the end, I read a lot of reviews of all of these books, and it seemed like most readers think the benchmark for dark academia is The Secret History. So if your book is similar to The Secret History, it is dark academia. If it's not, it's not, which is an interesting way to think about it, considering several of these books were published hundreds of years before The Secret History was. I would maybe heartily disagree in that Donna Tartt wasn't the first person to write a book set at a university or an academic setting. I mean, there is an argument for The Catcher in the Rye by Salinger to be a dark academia because it's a dark book that takes place in a university. It just wasn't in the top 50 of this list that I went off of. I read that book when I was in grad school. My young adult literature class read it. So that was probably around 2009. And while I didn't love it then, I think I would have really enjoyed it had I read it as a high school student. I also say there could be an argument for any book that takes place in an academic setting that has disturbing things happen to be dark academia. I mean, if we're counting Ninth House, are we counting Harry Potter? They're both fantastical. Ninth House is rooted in the real world because Yale is a real place, but is Harry Potter just not dark enough because it's middle grade rather than young adult or adult? I don't know. It's a debate. I personally would define dark academia as a book or movie that has an academic setting, whether it be a boarding school or a college or a university. I don't know if I've ever seen one that's set at like a regular public high school, because I think part of it is being separated from your family to allow these dark things to happen, to sort of pull you away from your maybe support system you've had when you were either in elementary school, grade school, middle school, or high school in a town you're familiar with, and you get pulled to a new place. But I'm going to be super honest. I don't love any literary rules in general, probably because I am a librarian. So I feel like if a book feels like it's dark academia to you, then you should count it as dark academia in your heart. I'm going to give you a quick aside before I leave you. One of my best friends and my roommate from college is a Latin and Greek professor at a very well-known university in the US. Her literal job is what the mentors are doing in a lot of these books, like The Secret History, like The Maidens. She teaches these dead language classes. She hates The Secret History. She mostly hates dark academia and kind of refuses to read it. She does like Carol Goodman. I made her read The Lake of Dead Languages when we were in college, because we lived together senior year after I had spent a semester in England. And she did like that book. I asked her recently about how she felt, because I knew I was going to do this video about dark academia, and this is paraphrased, but she said, Latin and Greek students aren't that cool. They aren't getting involved in murder cults or sex cults or trying to raise the dead. They are doing what we did in college, meaning her and I. Mostly staying in on the weekends watching Lord of the Rings and anime. I'll leave you with that.